Hey good folks, welcome to Devs and Dice. My name is Leif, and each and every week I paint up a miniature for Dungeons and Dragons. Today I'm gonna show you how I painted up the air elemental from Wizkids' Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. But before we start, I wanna ask you to help me against the algorithm by liking, sharing, and of course, subscribing. This way, you help the channel, but also you make sure that more people get to see the content I put out each and every week. Alright, with that shameless plug out of the way, it is time to paint the air elemental. A couple of years ago I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis. And like many others out there, I now have boxes of shame. Legions of unpainted minis. Now this is my underdog story. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures. Alright, so this is the air elemental from Wizkids' Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. Now this model is a transparent one, and I noticed quite quickly that there were some terrible mold lines all over this model. I think the model consists of at least 5 or 6 parts that have been glued together. I tried removing the mold lines using my hobby knife. I tried also a diamond file. I even tried using a nail file that I specifically bought for crafting. And of course, I tried the Citadel mold remover. Now, the way the model was sculpted and the smoothness of it meant that I couldn't use my trick with the water paste like last week's video when I did the water elemental. I did my best, but I still saw quite nasty mold lines, to be honest. But I started out with gluing the mini to the base. Now with that done, I started out with some simple basing using super glue and my grout and sand mixture. Now since I couldn't remove the mold lines, I started devising a plan that perhaps if I can't remove the mold lines, perhaps I can get people to, direct their attention somewhere else on the model. And I also wanted to make this air elemental look a little bit more dangerous. It looked kind of, sweet and fluffy. I had some miniature farm animals that I wondered if I could attach to the elemental. Now these farm animals didn't make a good fit, but luckily I had some time ago bought some skulls from Citadel. So I just cut out some human, orcish, and other strange creatures' skulls and different parts. I also remember that I had bought some Frostgrave cultists. So I cut out some of the arms that looked like sort of skeletal arms. I made sure to remove the mold line on the skulls. When it came to the arms, I decided to cut them down to sort of sell the illusion of them stretching out from within the air elemental. Now, when it came to attach these bits, I knew I needed to use some more sort of tacky super glue, and most likely I would need some activator as well. Once I had the process nailed down, I would place the bits where I wanted them. And I purposely placed the parts where I think they would get the most sort of attention. In particular, I placed the skeletal arms so that they would affect the main profile of the miniature. I even split some of the skulls so it would look like they were half sunken into the elemental. And this is what it looks like, and you can see that I've actually sort of tried to sculpt in some of them using superglue and activator. So when it comes to painting, I did a zenithal priming using black and white to get a very stark contrast in the base coat. I started out airbrushing on some Prussian blue artist ink from Liquitex. As you can see, this transparent ink really sort of brings out the colors in the white parts. I added some red-orange ink into the pot to make it more purple looking, and I sprayed it from a sort of downward angle. Then I added some uniform grey from Army Painter to the pot, in hopes to have a more coverage and sort of brighten it up a little bit. However, I quickly realized that it wasn't enough, so I added some matte white to the pot as well. And I have to admit that this entire paint-up was really just being experimental and sort of creative. And I was fine with that. I wanted to see what effect different mediums and colors had when shooting them through the airbrush. At this point I started getting a little bit more sort of a fluffy white two-tone looking cloud. Here I'm adding a little bit of carbon black ink to the mix. I'm also adding a little bit of Prussian blue from Vallejo. I'm looking for that dark storm cloud kind of color to replace the black that I have in the miniature. Now I'm shooting this from below primarily to do a sort of reverse zenithal, if you will. This took some additional experimentation to get to the color where I wanted it. Here I'm just reinforcing the highlights a bit with some white opaque ink. I'm just trying to catch the very tops of the air elemental to show some volume. In order to make it a little bit blue again, I added a few drops of cerulean blue ink to the pot. Then I swapped colors to some transparent purple ink. This one I just sort of shot here and there on a miniature just to give some sort of variation. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it's dry. Now the first color I am going to add to the wet palette is Jackbone from P3 Privateer Press. I'm just looking to get a first good base coat of this beige bone color on all of the skeletal parts. This took a couple of coats to get a good coverage since I'm using quite thinned out paints. And this is what we have so far. I am happy with the base coats on the Mini, but I wanted to add some texture and highlights. So I started with adding some matte white to the palette. I diluted this using the flow improver, similar to how I did my repaint of the fire elemental. Of course, testing the paint on myself first before applying it to the Mini. My idea was that I wanted to create a sort of dotted and dashed line highlight structure to sort of create some visual interest and movement into the piece. So I started laying white dots and streaks in a chaotic way everywhere where there was sort of a bright blue color. Yeah, and there you can see my full set of majestic northern hair in the foreground. I'm sorry for that. And as you can see, the mold lines are quite visible, and if I can say anything positive, I think that them showing as much as they're doing sort of liberated me in my mind, because I mean, I couldn't fail. In a sense, I already had failed, so I might as well sort of just roll with the punches and be creative. So I might as well try this funky way of highlighting. I mixed up some of that matte white with some of that jackbone just to create the highlight color for all of the skeletal parts. And now I'm just doing a very basic highlight on all of the skeleton parts, just trying to think of where the light would hit from above. And again, I'm doing this quite stark because I want to call attention to these parts instead of sort of people looking at the fracking mold lines. So this is where it's at right now. Then I came in with some Army Painter's blue tone. I just added this here and there where I wanted a little bit more contrast. And I also added some of the blue tone to the skeletal parts to sort of a little bit just blend them in to the rest of the elemental. Now for that base, I decided to go with some mud texture from Vallejo. Here I'm just using a coffee stirrer to apply a decent amount on the base. Then I used the Citadel modeling tool to sort of move the paste around until it was evenly distributed. Then I used an old hobby brush with some water to sort of dial down the tips of the paste and sort of make it look a little bit more natural. And you can see I'm also fading the mud sort of onto the miniature. And this is what it looks like when it's dried. Now for some final touches, I added Army Painter's dark tone onto the mud. And we're coming up close to the end, so let's look at the final result. Alright people, what did you think about this paint-up of the great mold line riddled one? Jokes aside, please tell me in the comments down below. Also, have you actually painted this miniature? What did you do to remove all of the mold lines? Tell me, I really want to know. Anyways, if you have watched through this video, then I assume that at least this has been somewhat entertaining. Now I kindly ask you to return the love by liking, sharing, or hitting the subscribe button. And don't forget that bell icon. Well, good people, I think that's all for me this week. I want to wish you a great day, wherever or whenever you are. Until next time, toodaloo.